Okay. Are we on?
Yeah.
Welcome back to Luther Sewell's Woven in Time by Dugan. And I'm Dugan, and this is my brother David, or as we called him when he was growing up, Herbie. So uh, I want him to share some of his memories because he is 17 years younger than me. I was 17 years old when he was born. I had just finished the my junior year in high school when he was born, and my sister had just left home. My brother had been gone for about 5 years, and that makes me the only one that can remember in my family of five children that lived at home with each of my siblings. Now, our brother Dwight, he lived at home with all of his, but he don't remember. He was less than 2 years old when my brother Fred, when he moved away. So I'm going to turn it over to David, and I have to think because he's Herbie in my mind. But I will probably interrupt him and ask him questions. Um, Now, David, share some memories in any uh, order you would like.
Okay. My very first memory happened. What was Grandmother and Granddaddy Johnson? What was their address on Denny Road in Greensboro?
36, no,
Five
507.
507 Denny Road in Greensboro, North Carolina.
The camera is right there.
And um, so my very first memory, I guess, that I can remember, I would have been probably a year and a half. And I was just a little toddler. And I was in the living room at the house on Denny Road. And my granddaddy Johnson was watching television. And I was running around, playing around in the living room. And I remember I started to leave that room and go into like a dining area that wasn't very well lit. And he called me back and he had me to hug him. And he called me back and he got me close enough to him. Then he took his cane. My granddaddy had a cane. He took his cane and he hooked it around my neck and pulled me back to him, and so I could give him a hug and a kiss. And I remember kissing granddaddy, and then I just bebopped on my way back through that dark dining area, and in it on the other side of the dining area, it opened up into the kitchen. And I remember coming to the other side of that dining area, and there's two women at the sink, standing at the kitchen sink, with their backs turned to me. They were facing the sink, and I don't know what they were doing. If they were washing dishes, I don't know what they were doing. But I remember somehow I got their attention. They both just turned to me and looked at me. And I remember my grandmother Johnson. She told me to go lay down on her bed. There was a room off from the kitchen, which was pink, as I recall. And I went in there and I laid down in her bed, and I think I went to sleep or something. And that was my very first memory.
What was the other lady? Was it?
It was my mom.
It was mom.
It was mom.
Yeah.
It was mom and grandmother.
Yeah.
And but my grandmother's one really was talking to me then. She told me to go lay down in that room, and I just went in there because I was obedient. I was obedient kid, and that's what I did.
Yeah, he was obedient. I've got a lot of memories of that same kitchen. A lot of precious memories of that same kitchen. But it's not my time. It's your time.
Well, the next memory I had was sometime after that. And again, I was little. I was a year and a half or so. I was way less than 2 years old. And there was also that around that dining area that I mentioned that I ran through that was darker area. It was like an interior room. I don't remember it having any windows in it.
Do you know why that room was so dark?
There wasn't any lights on in there at the time. I guess the lights were turned off. It was the daytime,
and there were no windows.
Right, it was an interior type of room.
But originally there were windows.
Okay.
But that house was built without a bathroom, and when bathrooms became a thing,
they added it where the window was.
Toilets. They took part of the back porch and made the bathroom, and that took those two windows. It was double windows going out to the northern side of the house.
Well, on the other side of the house from there, if you go through that room, rather than going straight through to the kitchen from the living room, you go to the left. There was this little bedroom, a side bedroom, and it had its own doors. I remember that went outside that bedroom, right?
Yeah,
a door went down.
That was Granddaddy's bedroom.
Okay. Well, grandmother was in that room, and she was on the bed. She was sitting on the bed in that room. So as I went into the room, she was sitting on the right, and she was sitting on the bed, and my mom was standing up. So all my first memories have to do. Mom isn't a part of all of them too. But anyway, so mom was there and she was standing up in front of grandmother beside the bed, and I was standing up beside my mom. And I remember grandmother Johnson, and she was talking something I couldn't understand. It was muttering, and you would think any kid a year and a half old, probably you would think all adult voices might sound like that. But I remember distinctly that I could understand what my mom said seemed to make sense, or what my grandmother had said sometime before then about going in her bed made sense. But that she was her sound were muffled. I couldn't make it out. I couldn't understand anything she was saying. But then I would understand what mom would say stuff back to her. As an adult, I realized later that 3 weeks before my grandmother Johnson died, she had a stroke, and so I'm guessing that would have been within that window of time when my grandmother was struggling from the effects of that stroke. So those are my first two memories, and they both include my grandmother Johnson.
Well, grandmother had several strokes, and her speech problem was much more than 3 weeks. It lasted months.
Well,
But
yeah.
there were times that she was better. When she got nervous or upset,
Mhm.
then she would just blurt out words like you said that didn't make any sense.
Right. Okay.
Uh, and she, in some words, she could not pronounce even.
So anyway, so after that, I guess if you're trying to fit things in chronologically, just from memories, probably the next memory that I have was at my house in Greensboro at 3607 Mizell Road, where we lived. And I was in the middle bedroom of that house, and there was a lady who was with me, an older lady, much, much older lady. And I remember I couldn't fit her in my brain. I didn't know who this lady was, but I just know it seemed to be me and her alone in this room. And she was just there, and I was just playing, but I didn't know who she was. As later on in life, my mom told me that um, my grandmother Johnson had a really good friend, and her name was Molly Clay. And Molly Clay, my mom and their family all referred to Molly Clay as Aunt Molly, even though she was no blood relation to our family, or at least not a close blood relation. Um, but that I did not go to grandmother's funeral, and that I stayed at home. And Aunt Molly Clay, or Aunt Molly, grandmother's close friend, I guess she didn't go to the funeral either, and she stayed there with me and watched me. I was 19 months old when my grandmother Johnson died. So all those memories had to predate being 19 months old. And some people are like, think little kids can't remember things. And I'm just saying, those are, to me, it seems like a lot of memories before my second birthday. My granddaddy Johnson died when I was 2.5 years old. And I have some other memories of granddaddy other than the one that I mentioned earlier.
Can I interrupt again about Aunt Molly? I don't think I told you this,
Mm-hmm.
but like you said, grandmother and Aunt Molly and granddaddy and Uncle John Clay, matter of fact, they lived together in Uncle John and Aunt Molly's house at one time after grandmother and granddaddy were married and after my mom was born. Our mom was the oldest one in her family, oldest child in her family. But I don't know how long it was before grandmother died, but she told the family she wanted to see Molly. And it was on a weeknight. My Uncle Luke Johnson had a blue 57 Ford. And me and Daddy and Luke Johnson, my Uncle Luke Johnson, my Uncle Luther, who I was named after, and my dad, we took off and drove to Marion, North Carolina. I think we probably called Aunt Molly before we left and told her, and she said she would come to see Huldah. That was our grandmother. And we went up, picked her up. We got up there late at night because we didn't leave Greensboro till um, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. And what does it take to drive from Greensboro to Marion? 2.5 hours. And back then it took longer
Because I 40 wasn't
there
finished.
wasn't Interstate 40 then. So, but we drove to Marion. Aunt Molly, we put her luggage in the car, and we went back. And Uncle Luke, I don't know what they were doing. Daddy and Uncle Luke was doing in the front seat, but that was a cold. My feet got so cold, and you couldn't say much about it because they had to drive, and I didn't want them going to sleep. So I tried to, just bite it up. But Aunt Molly came and stayed with us and visited with grandmother until she died. And I remember Aunt Molly saying something to my mom after grandmother died. She said, I guess that's what Hulda wanted. She just wanted to make sure that we saw each other again before she died.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Maybe I'm not.
So my granddaddy Johnson, I remember a couple of instances from him, two specifically on the front porch at the house on Denny Road. Um, One, we were on the front porch at the house at Denny Road. I say we, I'm talking about me and my granddaddy Johnson. And he had bought milk off the milk truck. Now, again, my grandmother Johnson had died in January of 64. So I'm guessing this is sometime later in the year in 1964. He bought milk off the truck, and he brought me a small little carton of chocolate milk. And I remember I was on the front porch and I was drinking chocolate milk and I was playing and talking with my granddaddy. And he I guess I decided I was through. I don't know if I drank all the milk or I just decided I was done. So I remember just throwing the milk off the front porch, right off the front of the front porch. The steps went down the side, and I threw it right off the front into the yard. When I did, it must have been spring or summer because the screen door was shut, but the hard door wasn't shut. The reason I remember this is because suddenly a voice appeared from the other side of that screen door and yelled at me to pick that up and not to throw stuff off the front porch. And it was my mama. And I remember I felt like I got caught. It's probably the first time I felt like I got caught doing something. And my granddaddy yelled back at all, leave him alone, or he's fine, or he didn't mean to do it. And granddaddy, as old as he was and walked with a cane, he went off the front of the front porch. There were no steps. He just went down there, just climbed off the front of the porch, picked up the milk carton, and retrieved it. And I just remember because it was like the first
Did
time.
he come back up the front?
I don't remember. I think he handed it back up there. I don't remember how he got back up on the porch. He probably walked around to get back.
Well, that was good, 2.5, 3 feet down there.
Yeah.
Just one.
For me, it was a long ways because I was a little guy. But I just remember he went off the front to get it, and I don't remember him getting back at all. But I remember him handing it back.
Well, the closer you were to the steps, the closer you were to the ground.
Yeah.
But if you got to the far end,
it was somewhere probably in the middle. But anyway, so. And I remember Mom was arguing at me, and he started kind of defending me. And I remember that was the first time I can remember anybody really kind of defending me, and he was kind of pleading my case. And anyway, that was I just remember that. And then the other incident, we were on the right side of that porch, sitting on the steps, and my granddaddy Johnson taught me the first poem, I guess, that I ever learned. It was "Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo," and so he said I can still remember that on that porch, and. I was just a little bitty guy. And so those were those two memories at his house. The third memory that I have of him, well, I guess maybe more than third, maybe. Anyway, the next memory that I have of him, I think it was the last living memory that I have of him, unless my memory shuffled. But anyway, he was at our house. Again, he was alone. He was at our house. And he was sitting at the kitchen table. And we had some pecans at the table. There was a pile of pecans there, and my mom was cooking at the stove, and granddaddy was sitting at the end of the table, and I was just kind of running around back and forth the kitchen, the dining room area, and my granddaddy would take his cane, and on the table he'd take a nut and he would crack the nut with the cane, and he'd pop it open, and he would feed me the nuts. I'd come by and grab a nut, he'd hand it to me. And I remember my mom getting on to him for cracking those nuts on the table with his cane. And I remember him just kind of blowing her off. And I remember as a little kid, I never had met anybody with enough authority to challenge my mom and to blow her off, because her word, even as a little guy, I understood it was pretty absolute. And but this guy, for some reason, he was not affected by her. He just kept cracking nuts and kept giving it to me. Mom would argue, and he just acted like it wasn't anything. And I didn't really understand, but somehow I knew this guy, he had a real position if she had no effect over him. So I remember thinking that was cool.
As you got older, you realized the love that
mom adored
her dad.
Yeah. So anyway, he's cracking nuts and stuff for me, and I remember that was kind of cool that he kept doing it, even though Mom said no, and I kept eating them. And then anyway, so he finished, and when we finished up whatever they were doing, I remember he left. He got up and he had his cane, and we walked out the front porch and into the front yard, and we walked out to the edge of the front yard, and he and mom were talking. I was just bouncing around playing. Like I said, I'm probably 2.5 or something, and he went out into the road. We kind of at the corner of the yard, away from the side where our driveway was, but the other corner, he went out into the road, and they talked for just a second, and he turned around and he walked down that road with his cane. And I remember just in my mind now, I can still see my granddaddy walking down Mizell Road with that cane, just going down the street, and that's the last
dirt gravel road.
Yeah, dirt gravel road, and it's the last time I ever remember seeing my granddaddy alive. The other memory I have of my granddaddy was sometime later. My granddad died December the 12th, 1964, and I know that because every year on December 12th, my mom would struggle emotionally because she kind of commemorated the loss of her daddy. So it was right there before Christmas, and sometimes around the Christmas tree or whatever. I just remember mom crying, have hard times decades later. But anyway, I remember, so it would have been sometime in December of 1964. I remember being in that house where Granddaddy lived at on Denny Road, Grandmother and Granddaddy Johnson. And my daddy was there, and it might have been my first memory ever of my daddy. My daddy picked me up, and he held me up over the casket because Granddaddy Johnson's casket sat in his house. He laid, I guess, in a state or at a wake or whatever. He stayed at his house. And that's where the viewing and everything was for my granddad Johnson. And my daddy took me and he held me over, and I remember my granddad Johnson laying there in his casket. And I guess they tried to explain to me, that he was gone, or that again, more probably retrospect in memory, but I had the idea that he wasn't going to wake up, and he was gone. Um, that's a hard concept made for 2.5-year-old. So that might be my understanding as an adult looking back through my memory. But those are my very first memories of my grandmother and granddaddy Johnson. Of my daddy, like I said, of that memory of him lifting me up to the casket. I also remember my daddy being on his shoulders. I used to ride on his shoulders a lot. And I remember he was a tall guy, and I remember just clinging on to his shoulders because it felt so dangerous up there. If I fell, I was in trouble. And I remember clinging to him sometimes, just grabbing the side of his head.
Our dad was 6'4".
And I also remember as a little guy, as a younger guy. Now I was a little bit older than this, but probably preschool age, and into school. I remember my dad taking me to McConnell Road to see my grandmother and granddaddy Sewell. And I remember my granddaddy Sewell. He was a bigger guy, rounder belly, and he'd sit sometimes wouldn't wear a shirt. And I remember going to their house, and I would sit in his lap. I remember playing with the wrinkles on his belly, or the fat rolls or whatever on his belly, and he'd just sit there and let me play with him. And I sit in Granddaddy's lap. Granddaddy had a chair on the left side of the door as you walk in, and I would sit there in that chair and just play on his belly. I felt very comfortable and loved my granddad. I remember when we went there every time, the first thing we had to do was hug grandmother, and I remember that was so uncomfortable for me as a little kid. And I don't know if it was because I wasn't around her enough or what, but also she was in a wheelchair, and that was probably really weird for me because she's the only person I ever knew that was an invalid in that regard, at least. And it was hard for me. It was just uncomfortable. And I remember she'd hug me. I'd walk over there, it's almost like my duty to hug her, and she would hug me. And but I remember one time in particular that they had some Dixie cookies. They were big cookies. As a kid, they seemed big, that Winn-Dixie sold. And they had some in their dining area, and they were up on a china cabinet or something. And I remember one time I wanted those Dixie cookies, and grandmother told me, no, I couldn't have those Dixie cookies. You can't have those. And I remember granddaddy, because grandmother, I don't even think she could have gotten them because she's in a wheelchair, and they were up high. And granddaddy, I remember granddaddy Sewell's just saying, oh, it's okay. I remember again, it was like with granddaddy Johnson. He's kind of looking out for me. He went and got the Dixie cookies down and gave me a Dixie cookie. But I remember a lot of times at the house, mom and dad would sit around and talk. I mean, not mom and dad. Mom would never come with us. I don't remember mom ever coming to McConnell Road to my grandparents my grandmother and granddaddy Sewell. But I would go with my daddy, and sometimes maybe Dwight would be there. And I remember it'd get quiet. They'd just talking. Mom and dad would talk to, or dad rather would talk to his parents.
Turn that light on.
Dad would talk to his parents.
Did that help?
That's fine either way.
Okay.
Dad would talk to his parents, and then there would be long periods of just silence where nobody was talking. And they had a little clock that had a little rotating thing on it, a little kind of a globe thing sitting on their mantle. And I remember that clock used to just tick tock, tick tock. You could hear it. So it was just, I remember that as much as anything else about my grandmother and granddaddy Sewell. It would get quiet. It was quiet a lot at that house. And that clock would just, it was loud. It would just tick tock, tick tock. And he was a little kid. It was like, it was kind of, I don't know. It was just uncomfortable, or just seemed like time would drag forever sometimes.
Just different anyway.
Well, it was older people sitting around talking, and I was a little kid, and I was in the living room of that house. There wasn't a whole lot to do.
Let me ask you this: do you remember Granddaddy's chair where he always sat in the living room?
Yeah.
That was his chair. Do you remember his little stool he played solitaire?
Yeah. I remember those over there. But so those have been probably my first memories about my grandmother and granddaddy Sewell. And that's probably that's it. That's my first memories. They all had to do with my mom and my dad and my both sets of grandparents. And my granddaddy Sewell, he passed away in March of '68. And my grandmother, we'd still go to see her. My dad and I and my brother Dwight, the closest one in age, it was still at home. We would go and still visit. And sometimes I would be there with just Daddy. And but we'd visit them. Our grandmother by herself, we'd visit lots of times too. And the house still quiet and that tick tock of that clock until she died in like March of '74 when I was 11. So by the time before I turned 12 years old that year, I had lost all 4 of my grandparents. So, but anyway, those are the very first people I ever remember on this earth.
I don't know if you want to cover this or not.
No, I think it's probably not for tonight. I'm old and tired.
Are you really?
No, I just feel like
I was thinking that I remembered what you said when you were talking about that. The lesson he taught you about honesty.
Yeah. Again, like Jill said, that's probably for another time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess he's through for right now. So, listen, I really appreciate you, David. I really, Herbie, I really do. I know that there's not a lot of people watching now, but I hope that as time goes by, maybe long after I'm gone, there will be those that are very small and too young to understand now that will have an interest in the family and the genealogy and the stories in our family. And that's the reason I'm doing this. But we'll do it again soon, I hope. And when we do, or until we do, y'all be pretty. Thank you.
Right? Is that the play button? Or no, is that just start recording again?
I don't know if it's recording. What, it's
It's counting. Yeah.
How long does that say?
We're recording 6 seconds right now.